All right, so this is a really new thing for me. I did a public talk earlier this year in April, and that was a good experience for me to realize that I actually could do something like this, that I could engage with an audience and have a conversation about subjects that I feel need to be discussed in this time that we're in. So doing a live podcast is a bit of a dream come true, but the subjects that we're going to discuss are going to be a bit heavy and difficult. So the idea, of course, is to open it up to audience participation. So just to give you a layout of how this is going to work, uh, first I'm going to be speaking with Dahr Jamail, who we've got here, speaking to us live, I believe, from Washington. And then we're going to do a Q&A in the last 15 minutes of our hour with him. So people here in the audience, you'll have an opportunity to ask him a question. If I'm sure you're going to have questions come up during this thing. And for those that are here on the live stream, thank you for tuning in. Um, we'll also have questions coming from you. You can participate through the chat on this thing. Um, yeah, and I would just like to just thank one person in particular, which is Jordan Thornquist. He's kind of behind the scenes. He's the man behind the curtain doing everything that's made this whole thing possible. He was the first person to suggest this whole thing earlier this year. I didn't take it very seriously at first, but as time went on, it really started to make sense. This is something that we need to do. Okay, so I'll just introduce our guest, Dahr Jamail. Get out my notes. Okay. All right, so I've spoken with Dahr previously. I actually featured a segment of our interview that we had earlier this year in my TEDx talk. I think it really added a lot of weight to what I was discussing in that talk. So in late 2003, weary of the overall failure of the US media to accurately report on the realities of the war in Iraq for the Iraqi people, Dahr Jamail went to the Middle East to report on the war himself, where he has spent more than 1 year in Iraq as one of only a few independent US journalists in the country. Dahr has also reported from Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan. He has also reported extensively on veterans' resistance against U.S. foreign policy. It has now focused on anthropogenic climate disruption and the environment. Dahr's stories have been published with Truth Out, Interpress Service, Tom Dispatch, the Sunday Herald in Scotland, The Guardian, Foreign Policy in Focus, Le Monde, The Huffington Post, The Nation, The Independent, and Al Jazeera, among others. On radio as well as television, Dahr has reported for Democracy Now! And Al Jazeera, and has appeared on the BBC, NPR, and numerous other stations around the world. Dahr's reporting has earned him numerous awards, including the 2008 Martha Gellhorn Award for Journalism, the Lannan Foundation Writing Residency Fellowship, the James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism, the Joe A. Calloway Award for Civic Courage, and 5 Project Censored Awards. In Dahr's upcoming book, The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption, Dahr embarks on a journey to the geographical front lines of the global climate crisis from Alaska to Australia's Barrier Reef via the Amazon rainforest, in order to discover the consequences to nature and to humans of the loss of ice. Howard Zinn describes him. He is a superb journalist in the most honorable tradition of that craft. Dahr, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Patrick. Good to be with you, and thanks for the great, very warm introduction.
Yeah, well, I just lifted that from your website. I think that was a good introduction for who you are and what you've done. I've got a couple people here walking in. Hey, Paul. Hey, Arnell. All right, so I think to start off this discussion, I think it's important to lay out kind of the context. So you use a term when you do your climate dispatches. So you write regularly for Truth Out. You provide pretty regular updates of what's going on regarding abrupt climate disruption. You use that term very specifically, abrupt climate disruption, versus a more broad term like global warming or climate change. What exactly do you mean by using the term abrupt climate disruption?
Right. I kind of interchangeably between abrupt climate disruption and anthropogenic, which means human caused climate disruption. And I moved back to the United States from writing about climate change overseas for Al Jazeera English. And coming into the United States specifically, I felt like I needed to be as scientifically accurate as possible, given the power of the fossil fuel industry, the lobby groups, and the influence on the media, and how they had essentially kind of slickly managed to use the words climate change to kind of cast out kind of that nonsensical, well, climate is always changing. So it was basically an effort of just being as scientifically accurate as possible. So anthropogenic, human cause, that's clear. Climate disruption, because what we've done is disrupted the climate of the planet. In some areas, you might see even colder temperatures. Of course, overall, as the planet warms, that's what we're seeing. But essentially, we've kind of, to use an analogy, we've kind of thrown the climate into a bit of fibrillation. And so it's disrupted. It's not only warmed. Sometimes it's going to be colder. So that was basically just my effort to be as scientifically accurate as possible.
Right. That reminds me of, I think, a Senator Inhofe a few years ago came to I think it was the Senate, big climate change denier, brought a snowball because it was winter, brought it into the Senate, threw it, and was trying to basically say, so much for global warming, right? We don't have seasons anymore, obviously. I think that kind of level of simplification and denialism it's still common, but I think as the climate, like you mentioned, is becoming much more, um, it's disruptive. I mean, we're seeing more severe hurricanes, more severe situations with wildfires. You can go on down the list and see the erratic nature of abrupt climate change, as you point out in your work. And I want to point to something. There have been several stories that have come out more recently regarding the subject. Um, the IPCC, which stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that is a UN body of scientists, and they release a report every few years. They just released a report within the last month or so, I believe. I just want to quote, this is from the press release. Okay, this is discussing the differences between a, say, 1.5 C to, say, a 2 degree C global average temperature rise. So this is just from the press release. The IPCC just released a report. The report highlights a number of climate change impacts that could be avoided by limiting global warming to 1.5 C compared to 2 degrees centigrade or more. For instance, by 2100, global sea level rise would be 10 centimeters lower, with global warming of 1.5 degrees C compared with 2 degrees C. The likelihood of an Arctic Ocean free of sea ice in summer would be once per century, with global warming of 1.5 C compared with at least once per decade with 2 degrees centigrade. Coral reefs would decline by 70 to 90%. 1.5 C, whereas virtually all would be lost with a 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperature. Every extra bit of warming matters, especially since warming of 1.5 C or higher increases the risk associated with long-lasting or irreversible changes, such as the loss of some ecosystems, said Hans Otto Portner, the co-chair of IPCC Working Group 2. So the thing about the IPCC and what I kind of understand is that it's a pretty conservative report. And even for as conservative as it is, it's still quite dire. What is your opinion on that report? What do you make of the comparisons between 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade in temperature?
Well, I would echo what you just said. I've written about how the IPCC, and this is even coming from people who are authors of IPCC reports and studies, and their main climate assessments come out every 7 years. The thing about this report that I think people need to understand, that as alarming and dire as it is, that there's nothing new in it. They didn't generate any new information. They basically just took what they already had and put it together in a way to try to resound the alarm that they had hoped previous reports had sounded, which is the absolute necessity to try to aim to limit warming to 1.5C as opposed to 2C or 4C, which is the trajectory we're currently on, because there is a massive, massive difference in global implications between 1.5C warming and 2C warming, as you just read. So as dire as those are, I just want to reiterate that this is basically science by committee, if you will, in the IPCC. This is very old data. Some of it's more than 10 years old that they're using to make these projections and assessments. And then when they take all that data into their reports, it's an extremely politicized body. So when you have a country like the United States is going to come in and, of course, lobby with everything they're worth to go with the least severe ramifications of this data, instead of really showing what could happen and warning against the worst case scenario. And this is why specifically every IPCC assessment that's come out, reality has actually outpaced its worst case future projections. So as we catch up with what they had projected for the year 2000 or the year 2010 or coming up to 2020, we're actually ahead of all their previous worst case projections. And that's a trend that I fully expect us to continue into the future. And not just me, but some of the authors of IPCC reports whom I've interviewed.
Right. And something they mentioned in this, just the part that I quoted here, they discuss an Arctic, an ice-free Arctic. And from what I could tell, just based on the graphs that come out every year, the sea ice extent just diminishes pretty dramatically. Could you please explain the significance, I guess maybe to frame this using the term canary in the coal mine, right? Something that's really sounding the alarm that we should really use as an indication that the climate is radically changing. The Arctic is a very good example. If you could please discuss the danger of having a little to no ice in the Arctic region. Great.
Well, we are on track. The most recent graphs that we have, including data from this year, show the current projection is that we're set up to start having ice-free periods in the summer of Arctic sea ice within about 5 years from right now. And it could be sooner, but the current projections, looking at trends and minimum extents and minimum volumes, et cetera, show it to be beginning to happen within 5 years from right now. Why so many people are fixated on Arctic sea ice, myself included, is because there's several very, very worrisome things that are set to happen once that's gone. And we're already actually seeing them start to happen, but that they will only accelerate when there's periods of no Arctic sea ice in the summer. The first and most important, I feel, is that sea ice is basically reflecting back sunlight and the heat with it from going down into the water and getting into the shallow seas and warming them up to a point where the massive amounts of methane hydrates that are frozen into that subsea permafrost. Once that starts melting and those get released, methane is 100 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide on a 10-year time scale, and it's still 20 times as potent on a 100-year time scale. And once that methane starts getting released en masse, then we're essentially replicating the key extinction driver during the Permian mass extinction 252 million years ago, which wiped out 90% of all life on Earth, most of it in the oceans. And we are, as I said, on track to replicating that. Even this summer, we've seen lakes now in the Arctic that are literally bubbling because permafrost underneath them is melting and releasing methane that's coming up through the water. Other areas in subsea, we're already seeing releases. This has actually been happening for several years now, but it's now accelerating. So for this to happen across the Arctic, and especially once we have that sea ice completely gone for periods during the summer, then we're at grave risk of that happening all across the shallow seas of the Arctic. So that's number one. Number two, it shifts weather patterns globally, and it's also causing things like, as Greenland melts, and as that steady trend of overall melting in Greenland is continuing. Of course, it vacillates year to year, but overall we see a consistent downward trend as far as increasing melting with Greenland. And then that's causing a disruption of the Atlantic Meridional Ocean Circulation Current, the AMOC, which is a giant circulating current from the Atlantic. And as that slows down, that is going to affect weather patterns dramatically, particularly in Northwestern Europe and Northern Europe. So there's going to be major weather pattern shifts. And along with that comes rainfall patterns shifting across the globe. So food supplies are going to be impacted, et cetera. And that's still a very cursory glance, but that gives you an idea of how important it is that the sea ice remain intact. And the unfortunate reality that we're looking at is that it is on its way out, and the things that I described are appearing to be inevitable. It's just, I think it's just a question of when.
Right, it is a question of when, but it does seem like this is coming up within our lifetimes. Oftentimes we project this out into, oh, this is 2100, or this is going to be our grandchildren that are going to have to deal with this this problem. This is happening right now. This is manifesting right now. I think oftentimes when you read about climate change in any report, in any mainstream publication, it's projected into the future. But we're starting to see those effects play out in the present. I mean, we have wildfires that are breaking records every year here in the North American continent. We're seeing wildfires up in the Arctic circle. Is that right?
That's right.
And that's, I guess maybe to point on this, I think we as human beings have a hard time cognitively understanding exponential change or nonlinear change. We tend to think very linearly about these things, like it's going to gradually warm, things are gradually going to change, we're going to have gradual sea rise. That's how we, in an evolutionary sense, understand this information. But what is disturbing is that we are not cognitively capable, it seems, at least initially, to understand the very rapid change that is happening and how quickly that's going to cause massive societal change, collapse of infrastructure, the inability to get something like food, the way our whole agricultural system, our whole socioeconomic system is structured. We will not be able to have access to things that we absolutely rely upon, like grain, right? Like so much of our food comes from that particular source. Yeah, if you just had a comment on exponential change and pointing to what we discussed with the Arctic, but like understanding how rapidly this is going to play out. If you can give us some kind of understanding of that, that'd be great.
I think that's a very important point, and I think I can share a story that will really help illustrate it. And I share this with some humility because I thought, given all the research that I do and have done about climate change for my book, for the monthly dispatch about it that I write for Truth Out, I felt like I had a very deep knowing of, yes, all these things that we've been talking about in the future, they're already starting to happen now. I get that. But I didn't, I under something happened actually this summer that kind of underscored that I didn't really get it. And I think it's because until something happened directly to me that was overtly climate related, that needed to happen for it to sink in. And what happened was I was writing about this. I had done so much research for my book, pulled it all together. And again, I was confronted with a lot of despair and grief and depression. And so I took a couple of days off work. I took some mental health days, and I went to go climb a mountain in the Cascades, which late summer, Pacific Northwest, one would think wildfires and wildfire smoke might not be such a big issue. So I went into the mountains to seek solace. And while I was there, I was going to stay 2 nights, but wildfire smoke from British Columbia and Eastern Washington and Montana was so bad and started coming in so thick, literally billowing in like clouds that I could see. and I've had respiratory problems in the past. I literally I texted a dear friend of mine back home in Port Townsend, which is on the water near the coast, and I said, is there any smoke there? Because if not, I'm gonna bail early on this trip and come home. And she said, nope, it's clear. And so I literally had to pack up after the climb, and instead of staying the extra night and lounging and enjoying the solitude of the mountains and reading a book, I came home, and I drove for 3 hours west, and it took almost that entirety of getting all the way basically to just north of Seattle until I emerged back out of the smoke. And it really got me, you know, that's what it's like, you know, when the world is burning and you're surrounded by smoke everywhere, and you have sensitive respiratory condition and you can't afford to be in that. And then I also got how lucky and privileged I am that I could just leave and then go to a place where there wasn't smoke. So that really kind of underscored it for me, as well as then knowing that all these people who in California and Oregon, who their fires, their houses have burnt down. You know, for them, there's nothing theoretical about this anymore. People in Bangladesh, millions of people that as we speak are having to relocate and find ways to move to higher ground because they live on the biggest river delta in the world, and it's flooding because of sea level rise and river floods. There's nothing theoretical to them. You know, the wildfires, you know, the people in the panhandle of Florida or in the Carolinas from the hurricanes this summer who've lost everything. There's nothing theoretical and future about it anymore to them.
Right. And I think this is kind of the thing. We live here within the United States. It's still technically considered a first world nation, although maybe it's changing, it seems. But it seems like the most vulnerable people in the world, the poorest people in the world, are the ones that are the first to be affected by this. Yeah. It's all coming back, though. I think, was it hens coming home to roost? That kind of, is that chickens coming home to roost?
Yeah, chickens coming home to roost, and I really think it is. And no matter where we live now, even in the so-called bubble that a lot of the U.S. has been for a long time, none of us are impervious anymore. And I think with time, that's only going to continue to become that much more dramatically apparent. And one thing that I would add, you know, since we really started this talking about this recent IPCC report, is there's a very good journalist named David Wallace Wells who he had an article come out about it, because a lot of what we talk about is these degree changes, but a lot of the time people don't really understand the global implications of what it means. And so citing him and him authoring this piece that was published in New York Magazine very shortly after the IPCC report that we just spoke about came out, I thought I would read a few paragraphs, because he really puts it very succinctly and very materially what each of these degree changes look like. Bearing in mind, we're at about 1.12 C global warming right now. There's this talk about trying to limit it to 1.5 C rather than 2 C, while bearing in mind right now we are on a trajectory to hit 4 C by 2100 if nothing changes. And of course it does appear as though there's not going to be any dramatic changes to curtail that from happening. So now reading what he wrote, at 2 C, the melting ice sheets will pass a tipping point of collapse, flooding dozens of the world's major cities this century. At that amount of warming, it's estimated global GDP per capita will be cut by 13%. 400 million more people will suffer from water scarcity. And even in the northern latitudes, heat waves will kill thousands each summer. It will be worse in the planet's equatorial band. In India, where many cities now numbering in the many millions will become unlivably hot, and there will be 32 times as many heat waves, each lasting 5 times as long and exposing in total 93 times more people. That's at 2 degrees, practically speaking, our absolute best case climate scenario. At 3 degrees, Southern Europe will be in permanent drought. The average drought in Central America will last 19 months, and in the Caribbean, 21 months. In North Africa, the figure is 60 months. That's 5 years. The areas burned each year by wildfires would double in the Mediterranean and sextuple in the United States. Beyond the sea level rise, which will already be swallowing cities from Miami Beach to Jakarta, damages just from river flooding will grow 30-fold in Bangladesh, 20-fold in India, and as much as 60-fold in the UK. This is 3 degrees, better than we'd do if all the nations in the world honored their Paris commitments, which none of them are. Practically speaking, barring those dramatic tech de machina, this seems to me about as positive a realistic outcome as it is rational to expect. At 4 degrees, there would be 8 million cases of dengue fever each year in Latin America alone. Global grain yields could fall by as much as 50%, producing annual or close to annual food crises. The global economy would be more than 30% smaller than it would be without climate change, and we would see at least half again as much conflict and warfare as we do today, possibly more. Our current trajectory, remember, takes us higher still, and while there are many reasons to think we will bend that curve soon, the plummeting cost of renewable energy, the growing global consensus about phasing out coal, it is worth remembering that whatever you may have heard about the green revolution and the price of solar, at present, global carbon emissions are still growing.
That's a good rundown. Thank you for sharing that. And so let me just be the devil's advocate, because people I'm sure are thinking, well, are there geoengineering schemes that we can possibly throw at this? Can we capture all that excess carbon that we've produced over the past several centuries of industrialization? And can we would that possibly be a solution? Is there anything that's happening regarding that you know of?
There is currently no technology available that is scalable to a level that would be required to pull as much CO2 out of the atmosphere as possible to prevent us going into basically anything over 2C. There's the one thing I've come across that would be feasible, but this would require literally all global governments going into reacting together as though we were being invaded by hostile aliens. Something you'd see out of a sci-fi movie, like we're going to mandate that all government resources now go into stopping emitting CO2 immediately while simultaneously basically fertilizing, recarbonizing soils, planting as many trees as possible, using nature to basically do what nature does and pulling carbon back out of the atmosphere. Stop all deforestation, stop all burning, and actively work to begin re-enriching soils to reabsorb the carbons that current industrial farming practices have been depleting them of for decades now. If that were scalable on a global level, and that's one thing that obviously the technology's there and we know how to do it and we could do it rapidly, but, and this is the kicker, but that would require every global government getting on board with it, i.e., basically ditch the current dominant economic modality, which is fossil fuel based. And, basically every Western economy would have to be abandoned overnight for that to happen. And we see instead going the other trajectory of people voting in or like what just happened in Brazil, literally, it came out just minutes before we started talking that they've elected essentially the tropical Trump, a madman right wing who's a threat to the democracy, let alone has already talked about mining the Amazon and paving the Amazon and things like this. So instead of what I just described about this rush to, if we're going to have a chance at saving humans and numerous other species around the globe by doing something like what I outlined, we appear to be going, stomping on the gas, so to speak.
Yeah, I just pulled up a thing. It reminded me of a article that actually came on the Washington Post. The headline is Trump administration sees a 7-degree, and they're saying that in Fahrenheit, 7-degree rise in global temperatures by 2100. And the article just goes over how the scientists that work within the Trump administration are fully aware that climate change is real, that it's anthropogenic, it's human caused, and yet they're going full force. They're they're trying to get the coal industry back in shape. When Trump came in, he started selling off portions of national parks so that they could do mining and fracking and other various extractions. Um, it just sort of exposes the absolutely cynical and psychopathic nature of the institutions that we have and the individuals that exist within them. And I don't know. It's like it's really hard to know what direction to go in, where to put your energy, because it seems that the forces that be, or the powers that be, as it were, are very powerful, and they have their interests in mind, and they're going to continue to do that. I mean, and it doesn't matter what side you can call yourself, Democrat or Republican or conservative or liberal, but your options for voting. I mean, you have either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, but we know that I'm trying to remember exactly. I want to say it was Hillary Clinton, but I could be wrong. But when it was discussed that the Arctic is melting, that was opening up shipping routes, right? And they were talking about it in a very like, this is great for business. Like, we can continue to move resources around in a much more efficient way. I think that the climate crisis, and I'm speaking for myself, but I think when you start to really get into it and really grapple with the information, it really speaks to something much deeper than just the climate system. We have an ecological crisis on this planet. The living systems of this planet are being threatened and undermined by the systems that we are a part of, that we perpetuate, that we participate in some fashion, even if we are fully aware of how destructive it is. And so my point in this, I guess, this presentation is to get you to think a little outside of even your comfort zone, or outside of the box of what you think meaningful action is in this time. Because what you're pointing to, Dahr, and what so many other people are now pointing to, I mean, this is appearing in pretty conservative publications, mainstream publications, that, we're coming up against some pretty serious crises here. And the implications are, massive loss of life, not just human life, but life, period. You discuss the last major extinction event in which all that methane was released. 90% of life was destroyed in that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be alive in this time that we're in? And I know that's something that you grapple with while you're researching the scientific information. You're a human being, Dahr. All of us are human. We're trying to grapple with this information, whether it's new to us or not. You talk about going, and you wanted to go scale a mountain to sort of clear your mind. You can't even escape it there anymore. So, you're neck deep in this information all the time. I know we're not going to talk about it too much, but you have a book coming out in January dealing with this information. How do you stay grounded in this time that we're in?
No, that's a great question. And I think, as we talk about all of this really challenging information and what it means for us and the rest of the planet, I think the first thing I just urge people watching and listening to take it in, that, this is our reality, and really let yourself accept that this is happening. This is not a crazy sci-fi movie or book, but this is really, we have caused this, and this is the result of our actions or inactions, and this is happening now. And then second to that, and immediately alongside that, really is dealing with the feelings, like what I talked about. Is I go into the mountains and seek solace, because I get up in there and I get perspective and can put my hands on rocks or a tree, and okay, this is real. Like that, no matter what happens, that mountain's been here way before we were, and it's going to be here way after we're gone, no matter what happens. And that calms me down, and I think each of us needs to, but also, feel that rage, feel that sadness, the fear, the anxiety, and have all the feelings that come with this. I mean, we're talking about the potential extinction of our own species, let alone animal species, plant species, insects, things like this. And this is utterly massive. And I think we have to acknowledge that and let that sink in, and then find other people that we can talk to about this, which is becoming easier. As you said, this one thing that's happened over this last year is things are happening so fast and becoming so much more intense that it does feel like this is becoming more and more common in even mainstream media. I mean, you have even the Trump administration has acknowledged, okay, yeah, it's real. They won't acknowledge how much humans are responsible, but oh, it's this is happening. That it's become that part of it's become undeniable even to them. And so we have to understand that. And then I think it's at that point it feels like, I mean, I get into some of my own personal specifics and some other stories around that more in depth in the book that's going to be coming out. But I think it puts all of us in a position like any crisis would, where, we have to get really real about what's really, really important and then make decisions from that place. And for me personally, it means living with that much more reverence toward the earth, that, to know that this is where I came from. I came from this planet, and this is where I live, and this is my place. And I still personally feel very responsible for taking as good a care of it as I can, and then trying to figure out, well, how can I do that amidst this global crisis that it is overwhelming. And I have to boil that down and make things extremely local. How do I keep reducing my carbon footprint on an annual basis? I live in a solar powered house. I'm growing the majority of my own food now, and doing things like that. And do I do it because I think it's going to stop us from going over 2C warming or reaching 4C or 5C or worse? No, I don't, because I don't think it will. But it's the moral thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. And that's some of the things that I've personally started to do, and trying to withhold as much judgment as I can on myself and those actions. But it just seems to me like that's still the right and honorable thing to do for the planet, even though we've already really, the cake has been baked, so to speak. We've already baked, this much change into the system. I mean, another way that I put it, when excuse me, time is short, is, that when I talk to people about, oh, well, can we still change this, or what can we do? Well, the oceans and I think we talked about this on your podcast previously, Patrick. The oceans have absorbed 93% of the heat that we've put into the atmosphere. That's enough heat that if the oceans didn't exist, the atmosphere would be 97 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than it is today. My point is, whatever we do to the soil, or whatever kind of geoengineering is employed, et cetera, you do not remove that heat from the oceans. And that's locked in, and that's causing bleaching of the coral reefs. It's continuing to acidify. That's actually the brunt of what's driving the majority of the melting now in the Antarctic ice shelf, specifically the Western Antarctic ice shelf, including the Arctic sea ice. It's the hot water. And so point is, we're locked in now, and this is coming. And so I just think that underscores all the more the relevance of this question of, okay, so, I think it's less what do we do and more how do I be?
Right. I guess that's why I wanted to actually have this kind of discussion, because I tried to tackle this a little bit in a 9.5 minute talk, which you can't do.
Right.
You can hit some of the major data points in the beginning, and then try to talk about, how to live in this time. And it's interesting. You talked about when you went to the mountains to kind of find solace, and there it became very personal to you. And I think all of us have to ask, like, when does it become personal to us? When does it actually become real? And how are we going to behave in that time when it does become real? I think that what's interesting is and people use this almost as like a way to disparage people who believe in climate change. Like, oh, Al Gore was preaching this shit back in 2007 or something, or whatever that documentary came out. Um, and he's a billionaire, millionaire, whatever, and probably flies on private jets. So how can you really take him very seriously? But the way that he, when he gets to the end, he says, "This is sea level rise. Here's all this information. You can go out and get some solar panels. You can start keeping track of how much carbon you've released driving around the city and try to reduce that. You can buy, more efficient light bulbs." What it does is it tries to individualize action, right? I think that that's kind of the thing, is we exist within a socioeconomic paradigm which says that you pull yourself by your bootstraps, you figure this out, and if all of us can just do that on an individual level, then we can figure this out. That's not what this crisis is asking of us, though. It stands in the face of those cultural values. It's asking us to come together as a community almost. I feel like if there's any meaningful action, it's in being with each other, whether or not we know we can fix this or not, right? Like, we may know that we're going to be meeting our extinction, but still, is it still a worthy act to undermine oppressive systems? Is it still a worthy act to try to undermine ways of thinking and feeling in the world that are destructive to other forms of life besides our own? I think it still is. And I think that the climate crisis is actually asking us something. And it's not just the climate crisis, because like I pointed to, the ecological crisis more broadly, the climate crisis speaks to something that's happening within us internally as well, as individuals and as a collective. How detached we've become from the planet. One indication that was interesting people have brought up is, have you noticed that the bug splatter on your windshield has diminished the past few years? It used to be like you'd have a huge amount of bugs just splattered on your windshield. Now it's less than half of that. What does that mean? And that's not just climate change. That's the kind of chemicals we're using to kill off certain undesirable pests or plants as we monoculture this planet to feed cattle and all this other stuff, right? Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to unpack with all this information, but I think we did a really good job in this about 45 minutes or so that we've talked. And I'm sure that I hope at least some people have some questions that maybe have come up during this discussion. Hey, Jordan, hey, do you want people to stand in the middle there? Or how do you want to do that regarding that?
Patrick, one thing I'll put out there while folks are maybe getting lined up there is that just struck me is that I think one reason this is such a challenging thing to talk about, and that there aren't any canned answers that we can cover in 9 minutes or 42 minutes or anything else, is that this is a new point in our evolution as a species. We're aware of what we've done, and we're aware of what's coming. And so I think we have to evolve with this now, and we get to figure it out and kind of make it up as we go along, and try stuff that works and try stuff that doesn't work, and then learn from that. I feel like this is a new point in our own evolution, both psychologically, philosophically, and spiritually. And I think that's to mean that there isn't going to be just one answer. It's going to be very individual, but also collective at the same time. I just wanted to put that out there, so there's, I think most of the questions are going to continue to be open-ended, as are most of the answers.
Right. I think it's good to learn how to be somewhat comfortable in knowing there aren't answers to certain questions or certain dilemmas.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's a cultural thing, but we think if there's a problem, we have to find a way to fix it. Can we engineer our way out of this problem? And I think a lot of it also is because we exist within a complex society. We have certain individuals or certain groups of individuals that have enormous amount of power. We assume that somebody's going to fix this for us. Elon Musk is going to fix this for us. He's going to launch us into space and we're going to be able to live on Mars. Isn't that amazing? Like, we try to imagine that there's going to be some sort of technology fix to this. And I think we need to get a handle on it and acknowledge and sort of exist within a space of unknowing, not knowing what's coming, not knowing even what's really happening. I think when you analyze the climate, and this has actually been something that I would say maybe people that are call themselves skeptical or in a state of denial about it, is the climate is so complex that we cannot possibly understand what's happening. And that's true to a degree. As we begin to experience this change, there are variables that were not considered in the initial research, right? We're really just starting to understand it, but we do have enough we can perceive just well enough to know that this is happening, and it's not good for us. So yeah, I think that my note would be that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I thank you for sharing that last thought and jumping in there. See if we got any people in the group chat. If you want to jump in and ask a question, we'll do that. If anybody here in the audience, I don't know if anybody here has a question. I hope. Oh. Okay. Where's it at? Oh, okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Is there anybody that's got a question? Got a question, Bowen? You want to come on up here, please?
Perfect. Go ahead and just state your name and your question.
Hey, Dahr. Thank you for chatting with us. Really appreciate it. I'm Bowen. I'm the reporter who interviewed you.
Oh, hey, Bowen. Yeah, good to meet you.
I'm just curious. Are there any other books or other articles that you would recommend seeking out to further our education on this subject?
Oh, goodness. Wow, there's so many. You know what? The first book that comes to mind is Elizabeth Kolbert's Sixth Mass Extinction, which came out quite not too long ago, a few years ago, but that's a really important book that kind of gives you an idea of what's happening to species, including our own, around the world. And of course, it's climate related. Another really good one about the Arctic and specifically the sea ice is Dr. Peter Wadham's, whom I've interviewed several times. He has a book that came out, I believe Penguin published it 2-3 years ago, called Farewell Ice. And he's arguably the most renowned Arctic sea ice expert on the planet. And that's a really, really good book as far as that goes. And then for articles, the person who that I read that bit from, David Wallace Wells, who's written for New York Magazine, and he has another piece that caused some very big waves earlier this year, when he basically wrote about what happens on Earth if all the worst case scenarios come true, which is possible. It's not guaranteed, but it's certainly possible, and it's extremely apocalyptic. And at the time, he caught a lot of flack and was heavily criticized for being alarmist and scaring people. But now I think it's roughly a year later since that article came out, and now it seems notably less far-fetched. And it's a challenging one to read, in that it is very scary, but I think it's an important article. So there's those. And then, at the risk of being shamelessly self-promoting, I write a monthly I call it a climate disruption dispatch for Truthout. It's truthout.org. We publish it every Monday. I have one that we'll publish tomorrow. And what I do is daily, I'm collating the most recent scientific studies and reports, as well as extreme weather events that are clearly tied to climate disruption, at least in some part, which all of them are now. And I pull it all together. I usually introduce it with, a personal story. And then that's basically a way that people can, once a month, you're going to have the most updated studies that have come out, because there's so many, they're all around the world. It's and I don't pretend to keep up with all of them, but every month it's 2,500 to 3,000 words of, here's where we're at. This is what's happened in the last 30 days. So that's probably enough to have you read, and probably need to get a psychologist to get started.
Great. Thank you for the recommendations. I appreciate it.
Hey, I'm the moderator. Don't mind me. I'm just pulling up some questions from the chat. I've got a couple that people have been asking. The biggest one is,
when your book is coming out and where they can get it.
Yeah, the book's called The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption. It's going to be published by the New Press, and it's coming out January 15th. And you can pre-order it now through all the usual ways, directly through the New Press website, Amazon, etc.
Excellent. Thanks a bunch. I had a great question from Antonio Reed. He's in the chat. I hope I got your name right, Antonio. He said, what are your thoughts on the immigrant caravan? Immigrant caravan? Is this a sign of what's coming in the future? And do you think it will turn violent?
I can't speak as to whether it will turn violent unless they're still weeks away from the U.S. border. If it turned violent, it would be because U.S. soldiers decided to start firing on them, probably. I don't think the violence would come from the caravan. I'd be shocked if it did. But I see this as very directly correlated to climate disruption, as so much of the violence across the Middle East and the migrations that we're seeing there now. If you look at the climate models and NASA's projections, Central America, it's becoming increasingly challenging because of droughts, floods, and extreme weather events for agriculture to continue as normal there. And that's pushed more and more people into the cities looking for other jobs, which is causing these gangs and violence and instability, which is causing people to try to migrate to some place where there's just basic security and they can just get food and water. It always comes down to that. So unfortunately, I think this caravan is symptomatic of that. And I think that we would have, I don't know if it'd be in the form of caravans, but certainly bigger and more consistent migrations of people both north and south out of Central America. Because if you look at the climate modeling by 2100, if you look at the worst case projections, basically Central America, just drought alone, it's agriculture, it's going to be really, really challenging to grow much of anything there. Not even to talk about the kind of drought, flooding, extreme weather event combo that itself is kind of the terrible triad for agriculture. So I think absolutely this is a tip of the iceberg situation, unfortunately.
Thanks a bunch. Yeah, let's grab anyone in the audience. Yeah, come on up, man.
Hi, Dahr. I'm Victor.
Hi, Victor.
I was curious when you talked about the mountain trip and trying to clear your head, the whole dealing with this, researching this stuff, and how much of a toll that took on you to have to do that. I'm curious if you could describe a little more of what that is like to live like that day to day, to go through this stuff, and how tough it is to on you personally.
That's a good question. I mean, I personally, I walk a very fine line of things that I need to do to kind of keep a balance between, you know, the weight and the gravity of what I'm writing about regarding the climate and you know, other things like this political catastrophe that's also happening across the U.S. and now, you know, Brazil and other places around the world. You know, balancing that, which, you know, not just me as a writer, but I think anyone that's really consistently consuming the news pretty steadily on a daily basis is going to have to deal with this. And so, you know, it's time with really, really good friends, and it's talking about this stuff on a regular basis with people that also see clearly what's going on and the ramifications of it. And I bring up the mountain trip because if I can't get to the mountains, it's very important for me to go out into the garden and get my hands in the dirt and look at the trees and just be in the trees and with the trees and hear the birds and just daily connection to the planet, just to kind of ground like a lightning rod, if you will. Because if I don't do that stuff, and after my first big book trip a couple of years ago, I came back from Alaska and just went right into writing and pulling a lot of really intense information together about what was happening in Alaska. And I stopped doing the Earth connection, and within about 3 weeks was heavily depressed. So you know, it's consistently time with friends and time on the planet. And I really can't afford to let up on any of that stuff. As well as, you know, I personally have a spiritual practice that involves daily meditation and some other things. And I have to really be diligent about that too. Otherwise, it's just really easy to spin out.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good question.
All right, Jordan, help me figure out how to check out the chat. Thank you, Jordan. I got a question from Rob Siamets, and I know Rob. He's become a friend of mine. Rob asked, Dahr, I am going to be a father in 3 months, and what I constantly think about is how to explain this to my son. Have you ever talked to kids about climate change, and how do we talk to children about this?
That is a very good, very important, very hard question. I do not have kids. I chose not to have my own kids. I've not talked to real young kids. I've talked to I think the youngest kids I've talked to about this are folks in their early 20s who pretty much already get it. You know, I did speak to. I spent time last week with a class from Evergreen State University, just south of here in Olympia. You know, so some 19 and 20-year-olds, and they all got it. I mean, that was one thing that I actually found refreshing. Is I found that most people in the younger generations, I mean, I guess unless they're, you know, studying to be corporate fascists, they really get it. They really get climate change. They get that we're in it deep, and they get that the future is going to be very intense. But particularly people with kids, I think it's going to be very important to explain to the child when the time is right. And I have no idea at what age or when that's going to be, but let them know what's happening and let them know that they're living in a rapidly changing world, as well as why the decision was made to bring them in. You know, it was probably made because there's a lot of love, and that wanted to be expressed in this form, and that the parents probably still thought it was possible to do that, even against the backdrop of this climate catastrophe that's upon us. And you know, I guess one analogy I might make is that working in Iraq for as long as I did, when times got extremely intense, like when Fallujah was sieged and hundreds of thousands of refugees streaming into Baghdad, what I saw is that alongside with the barbarism that comes out in war of horrible things being done, mostly by the occupation force Americans, but alongside that were amazing acts of humanity that, you know, people just, you know, the love and the care, people just taking people into their homes that they didn't even know, sharing everything they had with them. That was actually far, far more common than looting and other negative things. And so I think there's going to be obviously a lot of room to practice that coming up. And I'm not trying to intentionally just put a silver lining on this thing, but I think that's another part of the equation that might help somehow when it comes to talking about children about that. But that's a great question, and it's one that I definitely intend on exploring in the future, whether it's by interviewing psychologists or you know, but probably by talking with people who already have kids or have made the decision to have kids, who are really handling it the right way.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for that answer. I think we'll do 2 more questions. If anybody in the audience has one right now, and then I'll do one more here on the live stream. Does anybody have a question?
Hello, thank you, Dahr, and thank you, Patrick, for putting this performance on. It's informational, and I think it's really important. The question is, I difference with climate change, and I'm not trying to diminish that, but I think that there's a disproportionate percent that can make a difference. And I recently there was an article. I don't know who it was or who wrote it, but it was multinational corporations, and there may be like 100 or so that are disproportionately responsible for our carbon emissions. And I know that I can make a difference personally, but I feel like maybe not changing or changing my actions, but maybe voting with my dollar and influencing these corporations. And is this true? Is there a bigger percent out there that's the corporations causing this change versus individuals? And if you could address that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, unequivocally, that's the fact. Well, for clarity, the single biggest CO2 emitter on the planet is the U.S. military, so that needs to be stated. Second to that, I believe is The Guardian published an article within the last year and a half or so, and I think it was something like 17 corporations, 17 international corporations that were responsible for this. I'm not going to quote the percentage, but I think we can say the majority of the CO2 emissions, and most of them obviously are fossil fuel companies, so oil companies to be specific. So without a doubt, finding out who and what those are, and Patrick, you alluded to this earlier, and then making a concerted effort to try to stop that from happening in whatever way necessary, whether it's voting with your dollars or organizing a boycott campaign, et cetera, obviously would be a very fortuitous thing to do, I think.
I do one more question here from the live chat. Hey, Dahr, thank you. Oh, this, by the way, is from Dominic. I think I know who this is. Hey, Dahr, thank you for this. What do you think Indigenous perspectives can offer us in dealing with the climate disaster?
That is another excellent question. I actually get into that at the end of my book because I really struggled with how to end the book big time. I basically didn't know how. And then a series of events happened that brought the Indigenous perspective front and center in my life. So I'm not going to give away the ending of my book before it's released, but I think I don't think I can state strongly enough that I think most, if not all, of our answers to how to have perspective on this and how to deal with it are going to come from Indigenous populations around the world. And I'll just leave it at that.
All right, Dahr, we have approached our hour with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. If you want to hang out for a second, I'll talk to you after this. But we're only halfway through this. The second half is going to be with Dr. Bones, and it's going to get really weird. And yeah, so thank you so much, Dahr. I greatly appreciate this. This was difficult, I think, but I admire you greatly for your work. And yeah.
Likewise, Patrick. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Okay. All right, guys, we'll take like a 5 to 10 minute intermission. Thank you so much. I'll play a couple songs and then we'll start back up. All right. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Dahr, thank you so much.
Patrick, it was great, man. Super well done. Thank you.
I was so nervous and I got in a flow, but man, it's so weird speaking in public. So thank you.
You did totally awesome, man. That you did totally awesome. Really.
Thank you so much.
You couldn't tell you were nervous.
Yeah. Well, good. Yeah. And it is weird because I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Bones. He's a very peculiar man, very interesting guy. And it's really weird that I decided to couple you two together. But in my weird way of coupling things together, it makes a lot of sense. So anyway, Dahr, yeah, I'll let you step off. And I appreciate it. I think this episode, this video and everything will be out in a week. And I'll just send that your way. And if you have any questions or requests, just please send that my way. I'd appreciate it.
That'll be great, Patrick. I look forward to it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, man. Good luck.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Testing.
Thank you for the question. Why? Why is it gonna be weird? Dr. Bones. Oh my gosh. By the time we get to the title, Another End of the World, like, say okay, man. Thank you for being here, man.
Testing.
Hey, Bones.
What up?
Hey, man.
Oh Jesus!
How you doing, man?
Yeah, let me turn off that Hank Williams.
How you doing, sir?
Doing pretty good. I'm about like 5 beers in, about to break into the rum. I don't think there's a better way to talk about the coming ecological collapse. Do you? Cheers to all you wonderful people I can't see.
Yeah,
Drink
no,
up, folks.
You'll be on. I'll show you in a few minutes. We're just doing a short intermission right now, and after the end of the song, we'll start this thing.
I'm excited.
Yeah, man. Thank you for doing this. I know you're neck deep in like so much shit right now, so I appreciate you taking time to do this, man.
No problem, man. I dig it. I dig it. I'm absolutely happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the first half we talked to Dahr Jamail, and it was pretty heavy shit. So now
Heavy, like we're all gonna die, or
yeah, you're like heavy. Like the ecological crisis is way worse than we ever thought.
so you need me to bring some life back up in that room. Is that what we need?
Yeah.
I got you.
Just be yourself, man. Just do what you do.
Oh, that's all I know how to do.
Yeah. How was the guillotine?
Pretty good, man. My sermons were. I know it's good when I start yelling, and there's a certain way I yell. Like there's this like I learned how to speak. Like there's a certain way you can yell without blowing out your vocal cords, and so when I subconsciously get into that, it's like the fire's in me.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. Are people listening right now? People can hear everything we're saying. Everybody on the
Good.
live stream can hear what we're saying. I don't know what the
Good.
fuck is going on. I'm so sorry.
Tell him to listen to more Hank Williams. God damn it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we'll start here in a minute, man. I don't know if you got, like, I sent you some questions, kind of.
Oh yeah,
some
yeah, I got him.
topics.
I was pretty
Perfect.
like knee deep in the shit, so I know what's coming, and I'm just gonna kind of.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay.
How's the crowd?
How long is the song? I'm gonna. No, it's okay. We're almost to the end of the song. Once we get to the end, thank you to the live stream people. This is I don't know how to fucking run a live podcast. This is my only time ever doing it. So you're hearing an unfiltered shit right now. Just me, just talking nonsense. So
Buy guns.
Buy guns. Yep.
Buy guns. With all the fascist attacks that have been going on in the past 15 weeks, folks, we've had bombings, we've had shootings, we've had white supremacists coming out the asshole. Now's the time for community self-defense. It's time to stop with the sectarian bullshit. If you want to survive, if you want to fight before the cancer invariably kills you, the same one that's building up in your prostates and ovaries right now, buy a gun, get into your communities, and protect the people you love.
Okay. People hear me? Yeah. How do I? Can you come back over here? I'm so sorry. My tech guy is like, oh. Can people hear me? Weird. Did you guys hear that whole conversation earlier? Okay, good. I don't know what the hell's going on. I don't understand this thing. Just give me one moment. We'll get Bones on here in just a second. Okay, Jordan, help me out.
I'll switch you over. All right. So now people can hear Dr. Bones and we're live as well.
Okay, let's go. Okay. Can people hear me now?
Make sure that Dr. Bones can be heard too.
How do I
Jump your settings.
take this off?
Go ahead and jump over to headphones again, and then click save. Save? Yeah, and then we'll just check it one more time. Click on settings again. Jump over to that one right there. Yep. Click save. Dr. Bones, you're live. Can we get a mic check from you?
Buy guns, punch fascists in the face, and prepare for the inevitable ecological collapse by making your own lives more beautiful than anything this rotten society could give you.
Fuck yeah, you're live.
Okay, beautiful.
Thank you. We're all adults here, mostly. So.
Well, I'm gonna say fuck. I mean, you're not gonna stop
Yeah,
that. It's just
I
not
should
gonna
have said
happen.
this at the very beginning, but yes, we're gonna use words. So, Bones, thank you so much for jumping on this thing, man. I know you're neck deep in so much shit right now. Not shit in a bad way, but you got a lot of projects that you're working on. We don't necessarily need to get into that right now, but I thank you so much for this.
It's a pleasure to have the tropical humidity of Florida finally meld with the wonderful potato lands of yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So I'm just gonna do a really quick introduction here to you, so people can get a little glimpse into who you are.
You mean the face isn't enough? This doesn't just describe.
Yeah, no, I know that should be
What
enough.
do you think? I put these patches on this jacket just for fun? God damn it!
All right, we got Dr. Bones, and he is a gonzo journalist, political theorist, and conjurer who believes true individuality can only flourish when the means of existence are shared by all. A Florida native and a hoodoo practitioner, he summons pure vitriol, straight narrative, and sorcerous wisdom into a potent blend of poltergasmic politics and gonzo journalism. Bones is the author of Curse Your Boss, Hex the State, Take Back the World. He is the co-host, of the Guillotine podcast, and regularly writes for Gods and Radicals Press, a site of beautiful resistance. Thank you, Bones, for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, sir.
Yes. I don't know how to start this thing with you because there's just so much we could get into. I think we've had 2 previous episodes where we have talked, and I think the first one was more like discussing egoism, Max Stirner's philosophy. And then I think the second one, we kind of got more into belief systems and ideologies. And then I think we got into your conjuring, your practice. I don't know how to describe it, but I think to begin, I'm gonna pull this up real quick. See if I can get this going. I don't think you're gonna be able to see it on your end, Bones, but I'm gonna play. I hope it'll play. Let's see here. You were on Infowars recently.
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. Good old
Where
Alex Jones. Yep,
mentioned you.
he did.
We'll. I don't know if you can hear this, but it'll be like a minute, and then we'll jump back into it. Let me play this real quick. Okay. Did you hear that? Did you hear that, Bones?
Yeah, the guy can't even. I love how he like struggled to read like the basic. It's a Texas education. I'm not surprised that Alex Jones doesn't know his dick from his asshole, but I at least expected for him to have basic reading comprehension. But yeah, it was a great pleasure to have Alex talk about me. I was super excited.
Yeah, trying to pull your face back up, Jordan. I don't know how to get his face back up. I'm sorry. I'm so confused right now. 1 second. I'm sorry.
Oh, jeez.
I am an amateur at this. There we go. Thank you so much. I don't even know how to use this goddamn computer. Okay. So what was that? What was the context of that? Why did Alex Jones how did he find out about you? Like, what was the nature of that tweet that you put out?
Well, because the right wing is very desperate for money. You see, I put that tweet out in response. If Alex Jones had actually bothered to listen to our show, The Guillotine, which is great. I think everybody here should listen to it. So we were discussing how the 3% militias actually got on Infowars. And we're talking about how they've started a new program called the Spartan Training Program. And so what they're doing is they're going into communities. They're training patriots how to use guns, how to set up security checkpoints, how to run assault teams, how to start neighborhood watches. Basically, they are starting militias across the country directly answerable to the president. And they mentioned several times about killing leftists. So my question was a simple one. Considering where the left is at militarily, is it better for us to organize along the idea of holding territory or more insurgent-based tactics where we sort of bleed into the population and then strike out where need be? It got picked up by Far Right Watch, which is actually run by a group of Nazis in California. That story actually got ripped off from them by a site called PJ Media. Then it went to Drudge Report, and then it sort of went viral in the right-leaning sphere because they are afraid. Their vision of a leftist is a meek, mild person, and that ain't me. Florida is absolutely batshit insane. We walk around with guns all the fucking time, and thanks to the castle doctrine, if anyone comes in your home, you can kill them. The idea is that we are so far gone in American political discourse. Self-defense is a necessity. Especially with everything that has happened over the past 15 days.
Yeah, let's go over what's going on in the past 15 days. I just last week or a week ago, I had an interview with a guy named Spencer Sunshine. I don't think that's his real name, but Spencer Sunshine, he's a far-right researcher. He's been studying far-right movements for decades at this point. We were discussing the Proud Boys. Proud Boys is a gang, or as Gavin McGinnis, he describes it as a gang. He's the leader of it. But he also describes it as a fraternity, a Western chauvinist fraternity.
Somehow that's a good thing. Yeah, go figure.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, you know, Trump just came out as a nationalist recently, so it's in fashion apparently.
Well, you just saw the election in Brazil.
Yeah, that apparently the results just came in. Did
Yep.
yeah,
The same guy that says he is in favor of a military dictatorship, that not enough people were tortured and murdered during the last dictatorship, how he would rather have his son dead than be gay, who has threatened to rape women to their face. Yes, he is now the president of the most populated nation in South America.
Right. There has been a wave of right-wing populism, violence. Speaking of the Proud Boy thing, and just to kind of give people context, they were at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, which that woman that was protesting ran over by a right-winger.
Murdered.
Murdered, yes. And then the Proud Boys. So apparently, what I understand, and clarify this if I'm incorrect, Bones, but it was in New York City, the Metropolitan Republican Club. This is a Republican club. This isn't some far right fringe group. This is mainstream conservatism in the United States. Invited Gavin McInnes to speak at their club. And I guess he was reenacting, or how did he say it?
He was reenacting the assassination of a prominent Japanese socialist. The gentleman in question was the head of the Japanese Socialist Party, who was executed by a young idealist nationalist who ran on stage with a samurai sword and plunged it into his stomach. They were recreating that and celebrating it. Now, what I find so funny about that is, remember, this is at a literal Republican club. Imagine, if you will, if the DSA said they were having a reenactment of the execution of the Romanovs, with fake machine guns. I can bring a little baby up here, too. Come on, we're going to gun him. They would lose their absolute shit. And yet somehow, because the right has such a fine control of the narrative, all of that was ignored. New York City was forced to comment on the fact that a anarchist A was spray painted on their club door as if it fucking mattered. And the police only did anything after leftist journalists raised a stink, which caught on to the capitalist media and showed that the NYC wasn't doing anything. In fact, the New York police allowed the Proud Boys to take a group photo with blood on their hands after they had beaten leftist protesters.
Right. That seems to be the trend, right? The sort of rise of right-wing violence. And then we could also mention, he's been hashtag MAGA bomber, Make America Great Again bomber, the guy, he was in Florida, right?
Of course.
Alleged guy?
You saw that van. You know that van is from Florida. Look at the fucking, come on now. You know that shit is from Florida. Of course he is.
Yeah, and he was sending it out to, it was George Soros.
With his fucking fingerprints. I mean, for the love of Christ, you send bombs out to 11 people and you don't think to wear fucking gloves? And they track the motherfucker on his cell phone data. So, I mean, no one's calling him a great criminal, but I mean, holy shit, just absolutely boggling.
Right, and then you have, I guess Trump was being kind of questioned or asked questions by the press, and I think a CNN reporter said something like, "Can you maybe tone down your rhetoric? Maybe this is sort of fueling some of these." And he says, "No, I'm going to tone up my rhetoric." I don't know what that means in a very Trumpian way. We all kind of know what he's getting at.
Oh, well, he also flatly denied the fact that his face was on the van. When they asked him about it, he said, "I have heard that. I'm not sure if that's true. I have heard he preferred me to some other people." So, and this is where the Democrats are getting fucked up, because this isn't a game. It isn't a school debate where the most intelligent point wins. It's about force. And the idea of the news cycle isn't about truth. It's about reestablishing the opinions of your base, your street warriors, making them feel good, making them feel right. Look at Benito Mussolini. Not a lot of people know, started out as a newspaper reporter. He was a newspaper reporter. And he came out for Italy as a soldier in World War I. So he was writing his war diaries in the newspaper. And he was integrating all these different things about Italian nationalism. Everybody ate it up. I mean, Mussolini basically took the halls of power just talking information and ideas. His black shirts eventually spread out, but to think that, imagine, for instance, if Paul Watson, or whatever the fuck his name is, somehow created a street movement that brought him to the halls of the White House, and that's what happened with Benito Mussolini. And that is what we are seeing with the Proud Boys. They are a literal political street gang that have engaged in violent terrorism. The same with Patriot Front. Patriot Front is an openly fascist organization that attacked an ICE encampment. And the Democrats, they don't have answers for this. Most recently, the synagogue shooter, I saw Rachel Maddow just did a piece about, oh, well, you know, there's often violence on both sides. There was another journalist for Think Progress that kept referring to all this as gun violence, completely ignoring the fact that the man said before he started shooting, all Jews must die. So if you're trying to frame this as a policy issue, when we are in the middle of a right-leaning insurgency, is not only disingenuous, but it is dangerous, and you are putting people's lives at risk.
Yeah, I just want to talk about that. Like, why we want to sort of pin it on Trump, right? That's pretty easy to do. Say that he's sort of fomenting a lot of this, or he's kind of stoking the flames of kind of nationalist right-wing sentiment in the country, right? I feel like Trump is a symptom of something. He's not the cause of anything.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing a rise in this kind of violence, and really there has been little to nothing done to undermine. I think a lot of people assume that, say, like law enforcement or something is going to step in and deal with all these really violent militias that are forming. Why wouldn't that? Why isn't that the case?
Because we've caught police officers not only with white supremacist tattoos, we've caught them with Proud Boy affiliation. When a ruling group, let me put it this way. All right. Back in the 1950s, if you were born a white male, you kind of had an easy line to the top. You went to college, maybe you got a job at the same factory your dad worked out. Life was good. All of a sudden, as capitalism and the state has begun to fall, the privileges that were given to the ruling minority are starting to evaporate. And when that happens, the ruling minority gets scared. We actually saw this same thing in Iraq when the Americans came in. The former ruling group feels like they are under attack and threatened. They are worried about their privileges being taken away. As a resident of the South, this is actually what kept poor white Southerners from uniting with slaves. There were multiple insurrections where they did unite, and you had the planter class. Literally, there's an entire interesting book how multiple plantation owners, what they would do is they would hire very cruel white taskmasters. And so they would literally allow this taskmaster to beat the slaves, to torture them, to everything like that. And every now and then the plantation owner would come out and say, oh, no, God, what are you doing? And so he bred resentment in the poor white population, loyalty among his own slaves. They were constantly playing one off the other. Instead of realizing that their privileges have been created by a system that is ultimately designed to rob them of everything, they are holding on to their last bit of privileges with a death grip because they are afraid that they will receive the same treatment that they have inflicted upon everybody else. And you will see that again and again in the South with white-black relations. Most white Southerners know what they did to black people. And their overarching fear is that essentially they'll get revenge. And that's why they're overly violent. That's why they're overly militant. They know they're wrong. They know they stole everything. They know they tortured people. They're afraid of being brought to justice.
Right. Yeah, and it seems like this, in the first half of this event, we were talking about the ecological crisis, the climate crisis. And simultaneously, while all of this is happening, we're seeing a resurgence of right-wing violence. We just discussed the neo-fascist, now elected leader of Brazil. We've seen right-wing populism all across the planet. United States is not the only place that's experiencing this. It's so crazy at a time when you expect people to really kind of pull their heads out of their asses. It's the time when they seem to invest the most energy into bullshit narratives.
Why would you expect that?
Well, I'm not saying I wouldn't or wouldn't. I guess I'm just saying I'm sort of speaking on behalf of the devil here.
Do you know why I carry a revolver?
Why?
When your adrenaline starts pumping, your fine motor skills go down. Your critical thinking goes down. So let's say you've got a pistol and you have a jam. Now, unless you've trained very well, your fingers do not have the dexterity that they've had while you've been at the range. You may be incapable of it. You may be incapable of tying your shoes, even though you know how to do it just because the adrenaline is going. With a revolver, no matter how scared I am, no matter how worried, I pull, end of story. In the same way that when humanity is in a crisis, we don't make clear decisions. That's not what we do. We're literally running on pure stress and fear. And that is why normally, whoever gives us the best, most comforting answer wins. So look at all these stressed out white people. All of a sudden somebody, oh, you're special. You're a conqueror. You're this, you're that. Oh, everyone's against men. That's what it is. Oh, you can't get laid? That's because it's feminists. It's not you. You're not an asshole. No, it's the world. And so it goes. It's the same thing. It's the same thing that just happened in Brazil. It's the same thing we're seeing now. People are scared. People are worried. It's Maslow's hierarchy. People forget that politics runs on individual psychology. People are scared, and when that bottom line of the pyramid is not met, they will go to the first person that does. Remember, for instance, one of the things I find interesting, and we talked about this on the guillotine tonight. Let's look at Rojava. Rojava is a secular revolution with on-the-ground, street-level communism. Women have full rights. In fact, they are so committed to destroying patriarchy that a male officer cannot give a female officer an order. They are committed to an entire social and ecological revolution. On the other side of the battlefield, you have Daesh, ISIS. You have people flying from all over the world to join these people committed to the most authoritarian death cult with the full knowledge that they will die. Rojava is saying we want a better life. ISIS is saying we will grant you a glorious death. And both sides aren't running out of people that are willing to fight for that.
In your last, not the one that you did tonight, but the last episode of the Guillotine, you and Brett did a segment about the IPCC report. Of course, we just went over that in the last interview with Dahr. But in that, you discussed the dire quality of that report, and then you get into mutual aid. You discuss Rojava, good, very, in that region where so much chaos and so many terrible things are happening, have been going on for years now. That one little glimmer of hope has sort of emerged out of that.
Well, they've been organizing for 20 plus years.
Oh yeah.
We have to remember. So these people, one of the things I find interesting about the revolution in Rojava, there was a certain point where PKK operatives were basically expected to pay for their own revolutionary activities. There was no Soviet Union to give them money. There was no third party. A lot of people had to work jobs, save money to buy arms for comrades. 20 plus years of hardcore repression, everything like that. So yeah, their victory is even more impressive.
Sure, right. Well, that could be said about the Spanish anarchists during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. They had been practicing some form of anarchism for generations before, the war actually broke out, in which they could try, from what I understand, try to carve out some autonomous space within Catalonia, right? So it's a lot of times the work is behind the scenes. It's not glamorous. It's difficult, right? And I just want to ask, what is some of that work? Because discussing the ecological crisis, discussing the climate crisis, who knows what the fuck's going to happen, right? We don't know. We
know it's going to be bad.
Well, of course, we don't know how soon. We don't know definitively, absolutely, with 100% of our knowledge, what exactly is going to happen. But we can know what we choose to do in the time we have, right? my whole thing has been to ask people to think a little outside of what they consider politics as usual, right? Understanding something like mutual aid, understanding anarchism, understanding communism, understanding this in a new light, right? Just want to ask, like, how mutual aid works. How can we kind of imagine something like that? What does it ask of us as individuals? Yeah, just your kind of thoughts on that.
Well, that's kind of a pretty big fucking question, and multiple people have written books yay big on said things. So I'll say this: to me, mutual aid stems from my love of individuals. I love people. I want to care for people. I want to see them do well. So I want to align with those people and hope that we can both work out something to where we both prosper and just live our lives beautifully. Mutual aid specifically in this standpoint is something similar to Floridian hurricane season. I was a small child when Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida. It was a Category 5 hurricane and absolutely devastated the state. And so living in Florida, you always had in the back of your head that there was a climactic event that could literally destroy everything. My father's house was actually destroyed by her. I saw everything that my father worked for, his house utterly demolished by a hurricane. The blink of an eye. Everything he saved for, everything he fought for, gone. And so that stays with you. This idea that life is a very thin rope. In Florida as well, we have many things down here that can kill you. I've seen a person actually killed by an alligator. I've seen a human being eaten by an animal. And so that changes your perspective on things. You realize how small and fragile we really are. And in my own spirituality and everything like that, I realized that my own land that speaks to me, the prairies, the savannas, the swamps, the marshes, the beaches, it seems like this land will give everything to anyone that asks, including anything that wants to kill you. So you have to be smart. You have to prepare. And so when I see these people, they talk about climate catastrophe and how we can reorganize society. They're kind of missing the point. Because if you think the same society that got us to the same fucking point we're in is going to somehow work itself out of it, you're chasing a fool's dream. You, where you are, should be looking to survive the new earth that's coming. The earth is not dying. You can't kill the earth. It is changing. It is adapting. And humanity will either adapt or it won't. The human species is a blip in the eye. But we can survive. And again, especially as leftists, we're talking about a planet that is going to see millions of climate refugees. Entire cities disappear beneath the waves. Everything that we have ever encountered is going to be turned on its head. And so we have to prepare. I have argued for a leftism, not just of labor politics, of strikes, of protests, but of water filters, of solar panels, of community, of buying land. I don't think that the society that got us in this place or the same people that deny this even exists are going to get out of it. At this stage in the game, it doesn't matter what the fuck we do, Miami is going under. Period. So if you're in Miami, you can pretend that that's not the reality, or you can fucking do something about it. I think the time has come. A new earth is coming. The people that learn to adapt to it and to survive in it will essentially be in the same place that the mammals were at the death of the dinosaurs. The great cities are going away. Chaos, strife, discord, violence, competition over resources, over fresh water. The majority of humanity will be left with their fucking pants down. Now, we could hole ourselves away in some private little chamber, like these prepper types with machine guns, and hope that we can mow everybody down that we don't like. Or we can start building a new world today. We can start building structures for survival. We can start building communities for survival so that when the inevitable happens, we can thrive, we can grow. And just like any other animal, learn to adapt and claim the new earth just the same as we have before.
Is there anything like that going on currently? Organizing to kind of deal with this? I mean, is
Absolutely.
It, yeah.
Mutual Aid Disaster Network, I think it is. I think their abbreviation is MAD. Either way, they're gonna fucking kill me for this. So, I mean, I'm sorry I fucked it up. But yeah, these people are a group of like anarchists and leftists. They flew into Puerto Rico. They fucking set up solar panels. The hurricane before the one that just hit Florida, they were flying in supplies, okay? While the police were basically saying, hey, fucking good luck, while the preppers were coming out and shutting down their neighborhoods with guns and saying, we're going to kill anyone that comes near it. These motherfuckers were collecting supplies all over the country and flying them in. When the hurricane hit where I live, we came together and basically made an impromptu community of resource sharing. There's an organization called the Socialist Rifle Association that is not only training comrades in a non-tendency format, communists, anarchists, democratic socialists, all stripes of leftists, going to ranges, learning how to shoot, but also they are doing disaster relief. They are driving into disaster-ridden communities, bringing supplies, helping to create these structures where people can survive. During Katrina, the aftermath, there were actually white supremacist gangs that were going around basically killing people. Leftists from Texas flew into New Orleans, got in and defended communities, primarily black communities that were being terrorized by these white militia types. AR-15 to AR-15. You make a fucking move, we're going to hurt you. They were setting up food, they were setting up clean water, and they were setting up self-defense. As the state continues to pull away, as capitalism continues to crumble, as the rich either put their money in a fucking spaceship to leave us to die, or private little gated-in enclaves, it will be up to us to save one another.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does make sense. I just don't know where to go from here. I want to kind of circle back to this right-wing thing because I think, again, as the narratives that we have been living within, the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves don't make sense anymore.
No.
Right? So this is where fascism comes in. This is where nationalism comes in. This is where this strong man, this man will pull us out of here, out of the situation. We just have to dedicate, and then there's all this identity bullshit comes into play. Like I identify with a white race, which of course is a social construct in and of itself, but it's very real, and people sense it's real and they feel it's real.
Because it's something, when you are a person with no education, whose mother is strung out on meth, and you're living in a piece of shit trailer that you don't own, when you have nothing, and you will never have anything, you can sleep soundly knowing that you are part of some victorious Aryan race. What the fuck it is. It's the same thing that telling people they're chosen by God, that they're going to be taken up in the fucking rapture. It's the same fucking thing. It's a secular religion. Mussolini, when he was writing the Doctrine of Fashion, even called it that, a secular religion. That the state was the new religion. In this, it's the race is the new religion. American exceptionalism is a religion. I mean, imagine looking at the history of the world and thinking that one country was somehow going to... But then again, these are the same people that believe that Israel is honest to God, chosen by the same divine being that somehow set every particle and every atom in place. It's all emotional. It's all feelings. It's all ideology that makes the individual disappear and instead offers them a vessel that they can fill. Same way with soldiers. You crush the individuality and you're a Marine. And while you may not be an individual, look at all the wonderful benefits you get. Oh, thank you for your service, sir. Oh, what a hero. Why don't we salute that man? It's the same thing humanity's been doing. I take a very Gnostic opinion on this, because ultimately, this whole drive towards fascism isn't anything new. It's the same death drive, the same desire to belong that ran right along behind the Roman Empire. Every empire. The idea that you were taking part in something that was bigger than yourself, and therefore, if you died, it was in service to this something else. Humanity has repeated this lesson again and again. And as an egoist, I put no faith in them ever learning it.
So as an egoist, what would you say for people that do want to change that? I mean, if this repeats itself over and over and over again, and we are facing this crisis of such magnitude, a global crisis, I mean, well, what do we do to counter these narratives? It seems to me, and this is something you point to, these far-right fascists, these white nationalists, they're much more organized than leftists, than people that actually want to live in a better world, right? They don't want to exist in this horrible nightmare. How do you counter that? Like, what are you seeing? What are you experiencing? What are you promoting to kind of counter that?
You build your own world. Instead of constantly reacting, which is so much of what the left gets stuck into. So see, every time a white nationalist shows up to a university, we have to be there to shut them down. But why aren't we there before? When a nationalist shows up to a community, we rush in. Why weren't we there before? There are tons of organizations that are doing this. There are organizations that are running food drives. There are tenants unions fighting tooth and nail. Effectively, we need to declare war on the world and carve out our own spaces. Because that's what the fascists are doing. As the state and capitalism crumbles away, the vacuum of power is left. The fascists are claiming all the space that the state had. The streets are open. We can take those streets. We can organize our communities. We don't have to constantly react. It's a question of, are we against something or are we for something? My organizing as an egoist is very simple. I want to live my life. I want to be free. I want to unite with other people that want to be free. One of my biggest inspirations for my own radicalism are the Seminoles and the Maroon communities, not only in the United States, but in the Caribbean. So you had people that were able to self-rescue from plantations and create entirely new communities. But they didn't just create those communities. They attacked the plantations. The Seminoles were a multiracial tribe that were very democratic, to the point where the United States said that signing a treaty with them was worthless because no one individual could decide anything for the tribe. They fought a guerrilla war against the United States for 40 years because their way of life was important and they wanted to live their life. It wasn't a question of a revolution. It was a question of I matter and I will live no matter what anyone does to me. That I will not sell out this person that I love. That I will not leave this land that I love. I must live. And so that's, to me, where we find ourselves today. Is your life valuable? Or is the revolution valuable? Are your loved ones valuable? Or are they only valuable as workers?
Right. Bones, we have approached about 50 minutes here. I think we're going to open this up to a Q&A. Did you have anything else that you would like to say before we get into questions?
I think everyone should buy a gun, take a medic class, start planting a garden, and start learning witchcraft.
Okay. Yeah, you know, I really want to get into the whole witchcraft conjuring thing. That would be another hour. So if you have questions about that, we are kind of open. I don't want to keep everybody here for 3 hours, but
I summon dead people, folks.
Exactly. This is Dr. Bones here. Okay, so I think we're gonna. If anybody in the audience, does anybody have a question? And then we'll start with that. We got Bowen. All right. I'm gonna. Yes. You've talked to Bowen previously. He interviewed you for the Times News here. In
Hell
Twin
yeah,
Falls.
fellow journalist. So I get to see the face behind the. Oh yeah, there you go. What's up, dog?
How are you doing, Dr. Bones? It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too, comrade. I really dug the article, and I noticed the narrative slipped in there. I like that very much.
Yeah, I took a note out of your page. Anyways, I loved our conversation. What I imagined being a 30-minute interview turned into 2 hours.
It did.
You know, it was great. And we touched on the magic. How does somebody get into hoodoo?
Well, I'm currently writing a book on literally just that because I got stuck recommending people all these different books. Because my thing is this. You can go online and you can see these different spells and stuff like that will tell you how to put a hex on your boss, how to get fucked at a party, everything like that. But they don't teach you the underlying metaphysics, the real interaction with the spiritual world. There are things that you won't learn. Like, for instance, in my book, there's a lesson. I want you to do a spell on someone else's property. Why? I want you to learn what it is like to do magic where you aren't supposed to be. Because then you can do magic anywhere. And this is back in the day, people were putting curses and they were burying these jars in people's yards. The old school conjurers were able to operate anywhere. I would say, I often caution people, I think that if you really want to be a great sorcerer, your first learning path should be shamanism, which I kind of cover in my book a little bit. But if you want straight hoodoo spells, Kat Yonwood's hoodoo herb and root magic. It's almost like an encyclopedia of every different kind of herb and root you can imagine in North America, how they're used. Blood in the Bayou by Dr. Sereau, which is a Louisiana conjurer that I met at Devil's Elbow Swamp. We got drunk. He was looking for these special trees that had been to the moon. Something like straight out of a Florida Man story. I mean, it was great. Those two would be very good. But if you want spells that you can use, but also a history book, I would recommend the book The Sporting Life by Professor Charles Porterfield. It is not only a guide to magic, but it is a history how magic has been used by sex workers, drug dealers, people that have lived on the outside of the law, the margins. It's an incredible history of how this entire community existed and how the occult was a key aspect of it. For anyone listening, I'll mention the spell that I gave you. Anyone listening, a very, very easy hoodoo spell you can do tomorrow. If your boss is either presents or defines themselves as a man, you can grab a King of Hearts. If your boss presents or defines themselves as a woman, you can grab a Queen of Hearts. If they are a non-binary person, you can grab, if you're a man, just grab the Queen of Hearts. If you're a woman, just grab the King of Hearts. Get your boss's full name. Write it down on the card. Get your boss's birthday. Write it down on the card. Take that card and put it in your shoe on your dominant foot. That will effectively have you walking over your boss, and you will see in effect very quickly about how you seem to have the upper hand in the majority of situations dealing with them. But yeah, those books, grab them and start putting hexes on your boss. Fuck the capitalists.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Bones. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Okay, I'm going to read a question here from the live stream. Turn this back around. All right. This one is from Antonio. I think he asked a question in the last part. Dr. Bones, are you considering the militarization of the police? Aren't the militaries and police preparing for this sort of unrest? The military has drones and satellites now, not muskets.
Oh, Jesus. Wow. It's almost... I actually did an article on this. The majority of Americans don't know that the United States has officially entered a peace process with the Taliban. After X amount of years, after X amount of blood, after X amount of corpses, after X amount of money, the United States government, with the most technologically sophisticated military force the world has ever seen, was unable to beat a series of caves and AK-47s. The greatest myth that has ever been fed to the American people is that the United States military is unconquerable. They are being defeated as we speak in Iraq and Afghanistan. There is no victory there. The United States is suing for peace, and they are not only suing for peace, they are doing it with the Taliban without the Afghan government. There are tons of movements that have faced repression, violence. The same thing was said in Vietnam. Oh, this isn't muskets. They were dumping Agent Orange on these motherfuckers, and still they fought. It's the idea that any technology is the end-all, be-all, and can end armed conflict is simply a myth. And my big thing would be, if you're going to say that and not, mind you, analyze any current military conflicts, you have to ask yourself who put that thought in your head. Because in counterinsurgency manual after counterinsurgency manual, the United States government has said that they are unequipped to fight an asymmetrical war. That the United States, by its sheer military creation, cannot fight an asymmetrical war. Now, these are different rules. I'm not saying that the left is somehow going to roll up on tanks and take DC. And in fact, I'm advocating for self-defense. I am advocating for the creation of armed communities that can provide for the working class, where the state and capitalism is leaving them to die, as in Flint, as in Detroit. The idea that those people are untouchable is frankly false. And it only sort of speaks to the amazing amount of garrison mindset that has been put in the United States. Really, the article, if anybody wants to see the data, if anybody wants to see the cold hard data, because I'm a journalist and not an ideologue, I did an article. It's called, "Yes, the Left Can Actually Win Militarily." Look it up. I have quotes. I have links. Be the judge.
All right, thank you. Do we have another question from the audience at all? Anybody got a question? No. Okay.
What the fuck?
Yeah, we got some interesting ones in the chat. We'll do a second one here. We got another one from Dominic from the last. He had a question for Dahr earlier. Dr. Bones, could you speak more on the merits of a cellular network and how such a structure is uniquely positioned to be resilient against repression?
Sure. Back during the 90s, the United States was running something called Operation Backwoods. And essentially, it was trying to break up the radical green environmentalists. ELF and ALF. These people were attacking with direct militant action, fire, all these capitalist developments. And the United States found something interesting, that these people did not organize like a normal revolutionary organization. These people were organized in cells that did not communicate with one another, that did not know one another. The United States government is used to hierarchical organizations, i.e. kill the head and you kill the body. These things had no head. And in fact, they had no body. So you could have a cell of people that identified with ELF's ideology in California, and they had no connection to anybody else. You could grab that person, you could torture them. They couldn't give you any information because they didn't know anything. In fact, we see the same method of organization across Europe and South America with an anarchist organization called the Informal Anarchist Federation. And what they do is they will issue a call to action. So, for instance, one year they did Black December. So they wanted militant attacks in remembrance of fallen anarchists. The call went out. Now, there was no hierarchy. There was no chain of command. If you wanted to do it, you did it. This unleashed attacks across the globe. Something not covered in the media. Fire bombings, arson attacks, explosives, shootings, all across the world. Anarchists rose up in militant action against state targets. The cells retreated back into the darkness. They weren't attached to any movement. They weren't attached to any party. The cells often changed names. So maybe they did one attack as something, they did another attack as another. There was no one to capture. And even if you captured one cell, that cell was unable to name anybody else. So when the state really gets its feet in the game and starts torturing people, it's useless. In fact, if you want a better understanding of it, you can look at a Marxist document put out by the African National Congress, which was a manual on secret work, which is how they built all these different cells. You can read multiple military manuals on how to set up these cells. The cellular structure allows for the state to effectively destroy multiple cells, but the whole organization still remains. And in a country where the left is outnumbered by fascists, where the left is outnumbered by a right-friendly state, it is those kind of tactics and that kind of repression that we should expect and start preparing for.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question in the audience?
Damn, what the fuck? Put that camera over there. I want to look at these people.
Well, well, I will do that, but I'll read another question here, and you can look at the audience while you.
Oh yeah, I want to look at these people. I want to I'm looking at that guy. Nice mustache. Yeah, little soul patch there. I'm about it. All right, yeah, that's cool.
All right, Bones. Here we go.
Whoa, I'm seeing like an autumn colored shirt out there.
Hmm.
All right, dude.
Yeah,
Yep, that's you. Yep, there you go. All right, that's cool. All right, I know y'all got snow up there. That's something. Frozen water, is that correct? What y'all got up there? I've never.
Yeah, not yet, but soon. Yeah.
Ugh, gross. Yeah. Fuck that.
All right, I'll just read this from it's from Rob. Oh, you actually he interviewed you for his show Moving Forward.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Rob Simets. Okay. How can we get over left purity when building effective movements? I feel like this is a big obstacle on the left when we are facing. Yeah.
It is happening now. There is a new movement, and when I say new movement, I'm talking did not exist last year. There is a new movement in the left that has decided that fighting over dead white men that wrote books 100 years ago isn't exactly helping us. It is understanding that we all hate racists, we all hate our bosses, and while we may have some different ideas about the future, maybe we should start organizing for our lives now. I often make the case that what's the number? 1 in 4 Americans will get cancer in their lifetime. So just looking at this room, for instance, quite a few people there, I'd say. The odds are that one of the people in that room right now will probably die before age 70 due to cancer. So at least one person in that room probably won't see the fruition of any dreams that they really hoped on. And they'll probably die, if they're working class, a death isolated and alone with no health care on a hospital bed. So when you put it like that, your dreams of a socialist nation spanning 300 million people are put into the exact perspective they should be. People are dying right now. The left is beginning to understand that. And we're beginning to understand that we have a lot more in common than we have apart. And even tonight on the guillotine, we had a caller ask, how can we stop this sectarianism? And a whole bunch of people have said that now they are going to actively start shutting it down. When we see a person shitting on anarchists, we're going to say, you are putting people's lives at risk. When we see an anarchist shitting on Leninists, we are going to say, you are putting people's lives at risk. The idea that in a nation of 300 million people, that one ideology is going to somehow sway all these people is, frankly, a child's fantasy. Not only that, it would involve one of the most savage, bloodthirsty, and frankly, horrible civil wars the world has ever seen. We are being attacked now. People are dying now. Trans people are being erased now. Women are being attacked now. Disabled people are being removed from society now. If we care about these people, if we love these people as human beings and not as workers, then we need to do something to protect them. And the simple question is, if you want to protect these people, we need to put aside our differences and start organizing for that. And luckily, and again, this is a new development. The left is coming around, especially this year. And we are seeing something that has not been seen in this country ever.
All right. Well, I think we're about done here. Bones, thank you so much for taking the time. Do you have any last words before we go?
Let's see.
Oh, sorry. Well, let's do one. Can we do one more question? Are
Oh,
you
I'm
cool
all
with one
about it.
more?
Hell yeah.
Okay, one more question. Skylar, yes. Dr. Bones, any thoughts on how Bitcoin or cryptocurrency could be used to decentralize currency or power and power?
I think cryptocurrency has a lot of potential. However, the sad thing is, especially you look at Bitcoin, the majority of people owning it aren't these, Matrix-esque libertarians. They're very wealthy people. So the minute money gets into it, the liberatory value of it changes. I'm absolutely 100% in favor of a currency that allows me to buy drugs and guns on the internet without being tracked by the government. You're goddamn right I believe in that. Hell yes. However, the problem is that so much of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and everything like that has been picked up by these right-leaning forces. So, unfortunately, in the left, it's been very bad-mouthed. I think there's a huge amount of potential there, as long as we keep the capitalists out of it. The minute, again, Bitcoin that is just bought en masse by all these wealthy people that can effectively start controlling it, it loses its value as a liberatory model. I think cryptocurrency should be embraced by the left. I think we should have a cryptocurrency designed for the left and designed for poor working people. When it's designed for poor working people, it actually becomes useful instead of, you read these stories about people trying to buy a fucking cupcake with Bitcoin, and it's fucking hilarious. Why doesn't it work? What the fuck? Yeah, then it's garbage. But if we want to develop a system where we can do things and basically live outside of the state, yeah, I think cryptocurrency has absolute value as long as it can remain usable and in the hands of the poor and allow me to buy high-octane drugs off the internet. I definitely want to make that very clear that I am in favor of high-octane drugs and firearms.
Of course.
Well, yeah.
Okay. Anybody in the audience have a question? Because I'm going to wrap this up unless someone steps up and asks a question. Okay.
Not even Autumn shirt. I'm disappointed now. Now you tell him I'm angry at him now.
Okay, he's angry at you. He's just the videographer, he says. Bones. I don't know. I think this was an amazing experience for all involved. I'm only speaking for myself, of course, but I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your hectic schedule to speak with us today.
Oh, not a problem. And again, to all those people, the world is changing. The climate is changing. Politics is changing, but we still have an opportunity and a chance to live the lives that we all want to live. Don't let anybody tell you that just because the world is changing, that somehow now you are less of a person, or that everything you ever dreamed for must change. While the shape may change, while the forces may change, you still have a future, a beautiful, wonderful future. The new earth will still be beautiful. There will be sorrow, there will be anger, there will be many species that we love dearly that disappear, but the earth, the same mother that birthed all of us, will not die. And she will need new children to hold her and listen to her. And that is our job.
Bones, thank you so much.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys. You want to hold on a moment and I'll talk to you after this for a second. Okay. I don't know how to wrap this up. This was a really interesting experience for everybody involved, I'm sure. Thank you so much for coming out, spending your Sunday evening with me, with Bones, with Dahr Jamail. Good day. Thank you. Talk with him. Sorry, I have you. Yeah, are you wrapping up? Yeah, I just want to talk to him privately for a moment.
Son of a bitch.